So let's just jump right in with a pretty wild question. Did a philosopher from the 1800s actually predict the chaos of our modern social media world? It sounds kind of crazy, but when you look at the work of Soren Kierkegaard, you start to wonder if he had some kind of crystal ball.
And I mean, just look at this quote. Kierkegaard wrote this down in his journal way before anyone even dreamed of the internet. This convenient little talking tube. This thing that could blast voices everywhere all at once. Doesn't that sound exactly like the phone you're probably holding right now? He was genuinely worried it would drive everyone insane. And, well, you scroll through your feed some days and it's kind of hard to say he was wrong, right?
So that's what we're doing in this explainer. We are diving deep into one of his most famous books, The Sickness Unto Death. In it, he lays out this diagnosis for a spiritual sickness he believed everyone suffered from. And the incredible part is how much it feels like he's describing the anxiety and confusion of living our lives online today.
Okay, so first things first, Kierkegaard sets this whole thing up like a doctor giving a diagnosis, but we're not talking about a physical illness here. No, this is a sickness of the spirit, a sickness of the self.
He gives this sickness a name, despair. But listen, you got to forget the way we normally use that word. For Kierkegaard, despair is a deep, fundamental imbalance inside your own being. And here's where it gets really chilling. He says the sickness unto death isn't actually dying. The real torment is that you can't die to escape it, because your self is eternal. You're just stuck in this state of being sick, unable to escape yourself.
So, what even is this self that's so sick? To get the diagnosis, we have to understand his definition. He says a person is a mix, a synthesis of different parts. But the self is the relationship between those parts. It's the conscious energy that's trying to hold it all together in some kind of balance. And get this, that balancing act is ridiculously hard because the parts are total opposites. They're constantly pulling you in different directions.
First up, you've got the infinite versus the finite. This is that constant tug of war between your limitless imagination, all the possible people you could be, and the hard, limited reality of who you actually are in this specific moment. Then there's the battle between the temporal and the eternal. That's the feeling of being caught up in the day-to-day grind, the fleeting moments, versus that deeper sense that you're connected to something timeless, something bigger than just you. And finally, we have freedom versus necessity. This is that classic human struggle, right? It's your power to choose your own path clashing with all the things you can't change, your genetics, where you were born, the facts of your existence.
So here's the bottom line. A healthy self is one that manages to balance all these tensions. Despair, that sickness, is what happens when the whole thing gets out of whack. And for Kierkegaard, that breakdown happens when the self isn't properly connected to what he calls the power that constituted it, which, for him, is God.
Okay, so we've got the diagnosis. Now let's look at the symptoms. Kierkegaard identifies two main ways this sickness shows up, and I'm telling you, they're going to look shockingly familiar in our digital age.
This table really breaks it down in a way that just clicks. On one hand, you have the despair of weakness. This is the person whose core feeling is, I just can't stand being me. So what do? They try to escape the heavy burden of having a self by just melting into the crowd. Think about conforming to whatever the online mob says, or losing your own voice inside an echo chamber. Then, on the complete opposite side, you have the despair of defiance. This is the person who screams, I don't need anything else, I will build my own self. You see this in the relentless self-promoter, building that perfect, curated online brand, or even the angry troll whose only goal is to impose their will on everyone else. Both are just different flavors of despair. One runs away from the self, and the other tries to build a self on nothing but sand.
So you gotta ask, where does all this sickness come from? Where does it fester? Well, Kierkegaard was obsessed with the toxic environment that breeds despair. He called it the crowd, or the public.
And man, he did not pull his punches. For him, the crowd is where truth goes to die. Why? Because it completely dissolves any sense of individual responsibility. He was convinced that real truth could only belong to a single, accountable person, never to a faceless mass.
But we have to be super clear about what he means by the public. He wasn't talking about a town, or a nation, or a church group. Those things are made of actual, real people you can see and talk to. The public is something totally different.
He calls it a monstrous non-entity. It's basically a phantom, an abstract ghost created by the media. It's this idea of a unified public opinion that lets any single person off the hook. You can say anything, do anything, and hide behind the idea that the public thinks, without ever being personally responsible for it. It's a something that's actually a nothing.
And what does this phantom public do? Its main job is something Kierkegaard called leveling.
Think of it like a steamroller. It's the process of flattening out anything truly individual, anything passionate or excellent. This anonymous, chattering public creates this pressure to conform to a safe, mediocre average. It crushes anyone who dares to actually stand for something.
But Kierkegaard wasn't all doom and gloom. He wasn't just a critic. He actually offered a prescription, a way to cure this sickness. It's a really, really tough pill to swallow.
The only way out, the only cure for despair and this whole leveling process is to make a radical turn. You have to turn away from the crowd and turn back towards becoming what he calls the single individual.
Now, being a single individual doesn't mean you have to go live in a cabin in the woods. It's about a shift in your accountability. It means realizing that at the end of the day, you don't answer to public opinion, or your boss, or even the law. Your ultimate responsibility is to the absolute. For Kierkegaard, that's God. It's about taking that personal responsibility back.
And this leads to one of his most mind-blowing ideas. He says that sin is despair. That's his definition. So the cure isn't just trying to be a good person, according to society's rules. That could just be you conforming to the crowd again. No, for Kierkegaard, the true opposite of sin, the only real cure for despair, is faith.
And this quote is basically the formula for getting healthy. Through that leap of faith, the self finally stops running away, and it stops trying to build itself out of thin air. Instead, it fully commits to being the self it was actually created to be. It finds its balance, finite and infinite, freedom and necessity, by grounding itself in that higher power. That, for Kierkegaard, is the only way out of this sickness.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Back to that talking tube, back to our phones, and back to us. Kierkegaard's philosophy is a massive challenge to our world, a world run by crowds and timelines and phantom opinions. He forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. When you strip away all the noise, the likes, the shares, the outrage, who are you really when you're standing completely alone?